Before we dive into this shocking documentary, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Your support helps these real-life stories reach more viewers. The metal door slammed so hard it shook the floor. David Miller froze. The guard pointed to the dark hallway of Bang Kwang Central Prison, nicknamed the Bangkok Hilton. The heat inside felt like stepping into an oven. Inmates pressed against rusty bars, shouting in languages he didn't understand. One man whispered, "No one leaves the Bangkok Hilton the same." Another added, "Some don't leave at all." Then the guard grabbed David's wrist, snapped a heavy iron shackle around his ankle, and pushed him forward. As David stumbled into the darkness, he heard something that made his blood turn cold. A scream, sharp and desperate, coming from deep inside the prison. It sounded like someone begging for help. Then silence. And in that silence, David realized he might not survive the night. Hours earlier, this moment was unthinkable. David had been sitting in a bright airport in Seattle, planning what he thought would be a cheap vacation in Thailand after a stressful year. The news channels back home were filled with crime reports about missing tourists and narcotics investigations, but he didn't pay much attention. He just wanted to escape. His friends warned him about strict drug laws overseas, especially those long sentences people whispered about on the internet. But David brushed it off with a laugh. Nothing like that could ever happen to him, he thought. But everything changed the moment officers pulled him aside at Bangkok's Suvarnabhumi airport. A customs agent opened his luggage and lifted out a hidden package David had never seen before, an unmarked brick wrapped in plastic. The officer tapped it with his finger and said one word, "Heroin." David's heartbeat went wild. He tried to explain that the bag wasn't his, that someone must have switched his luggage. But the officers acted like they had heard the same story 100 times. They took him to a small room with buzzing lights, a metal table, and a camera recording every breath. A detective from the Thai Narcotics Bureau slid a report across the table showing the timeline of his trip, the witness notes from the baggage claim, and the evidence pulled from his suitcase. To them, the case looked clean. To David, it was a nightmare. Back in the U.S., in places like Denver or Miami, police would at least investigate further, search for motive, interview witnesses properly. But here, everything moved fast. The detectives only needed one report and one sealed package to lock him away. David begged them to check airport cameras, but no one listened. The officers were calm, almost too calm, while his hands shook and sweat soaked his shirt. He kept thinking about his family, his younger sister Jenna in Ohio, his mother who worked long hours in a small clinic in Texas. They would never believe he was a drug smuggler. He didn't even know anyone who used drugs. The trial lasted only minutes. The interpreter barely spoke to him. When the judge read the sentence, life in prison, David felt the air leave his lungs. It didn't feel real. But when he arrived at Bang Kwang, he understood. It was real. All of it. Inside the prison, the heat was crushing. There were too many bodies in every cell, packed so tight people slept sitting up. The smell of sweat, smoke, and old food filled the air. Some inmates had iron shackles locked so tight around their ankles that their skin had grown around the metal. A guard told him that new prisoners often wore shackles for months, even years. David's legs were already bruising from the weight. He could hardly walk. As he stepped deeper into Building 2, the floor vibrated with the stomping of hundreds of inmates moving in unison. Someone yelled in English, New American. Dozens of heads turned toward him. Cold eyes, curious eyes, hungry eyes. A tall man with scars across his chest stepped forward, blocking David's path. He looked him up and down slowly, like he was measuring him. Then the man smiled. And right behind that smile, David saw something that made his knees weaken, a long, rusty blade hidden in the man's hand. The blade glinted in the dim light as the tall inmate stepped closer. David's breath locked in his chest. The man's smile didn't fade. It stretched wider, almost excited, like he enjoyed the fear pouring off David. The guards didn't move. No one shouted. No one tried to stop what was about to happen. In Bang Kwang, danger didn't need a reason. It simply existed. One wrong step, and you became part of the prison floor, forgotten, ignored, erased. The man whispered, "Welcome to the Bangkok Hilton," and lifted the blade. Before he could strike, another inmate suddenly shoved the scarred man aside. A quick argument broke out in Thai, sharp, angry words echoing down the hall. David didn't understand any of it, but he noticed the second man's stance. He wasn't protecting David because he cared. He was protecting something else, something he wanted, something he saw in David that could be useful. The first man backed away slowly, still staring, still smiling. David swallowed hard. He knew that smile meant this wasn't over. The second inmate grabbed David's arm and pulled him toward a row of cells. His voice was low, urgent. "Move fast. Don't talk." David followed, partly because he had no other choice, partly because his legs were shaking too much to resist. The corridor felt tighter the deeper they went. Heat trapped between the walls made breathing painful. Sweat dripped from the ceiling. It felt like the entire building was melting. When the man finally spoke English, it came out rough, but clear. "Name's Jason. Washington State." His eyes were tired and sunken, like he hadn't slept in years. "You almost got cut," he muttered. "New guys are like fresh meat in here. You walk in alone, you get eaten." Jason pointed at an open cell crowded with men pressed shoulder to shoulder. This was where David would live now. Inside the cell, the noise was overwhelming. Coughing, arguing, a radio crackling from somewhere, metal clanking, prisoners shouting through walls. But David also saw calmer moments. Someone folding old newspapers. Someone quietly fixing a broken bowl. Someone humming a song that reminded him of home. It struck him that even in one of the world's toughest prisons, people tried to hold onto tiny pieces of normal life. Those tiny moments made the terror feel more real, not less. Like this place swallowed hope slowly. Jason leaned against the bars. "What did you do?" he asked. David told him everything. The airport, the package, the detectives, the fast trial, the sentence. Jason didn't look surprised. "Same story I've heard from a lot of guys," he said. "But nobody listens once the evidence is logged. The case files don't change. And in Thailand, the timeline moves fast. Too fast." David felt a wave of hopelessness crash through him. "How do I survive here?" Jason's answer came without hesitation. "You follow the rules. You don't stare at anyone too long. And you find someone to stand behind you before someone breaks you." Then he lowered his voice even more. "Stay away from the guy with the scars. He runs half the block. Guards don't mess with him. Not unless they want problems." Hours passed slowly, the kind of slow that hurt. The heat thickened. The air grew heavier. Every sound felt sharper. David kept thinking about his family back in the U.S., Jenna in Ohio, probably eating breakfast before school. His mom in Texas, working her shift, not knowing her son was chained in a foreign prison cell. The thought twisted his stomach. By late afternoon, the cell doors opened again. The guards shouted for roll call. Inmates moved into tight lines, shuffling in their shackles. David struggled to keep up, the metal digging into his ankle with every step. He felt dizzy from the heat. Jason nudged him to stay upright. Falling was dangerous. People could be trampled, punished, or worse. As they reached the yard, David noticed the scarred man standing alone near the wall. He wasn't shouting this time. He wasn't smiling. He was staring straight at David like he was studying him, measuring him again, waiting. A guard blew a whistle. Every inmate dropped to the ground and crossed their legs. The yard went silent. Then, without warning, a violent crash rattled the far gate. A group of guards sprinted across the yard. Someone yelled in Thai, and then David saw it, an inmate being dragged into view, blood covering his shirt, wrists twisted behind him. The man screamed in English, "It wasn't me. I didn't touch him." A guard struck him across the face with a baton. Another guard shouted. Jason whispered, "Someone's dead." David's heart kicked so hard he couldn't breathe. Because the guards weren't dragging just any prisoner. They were dragging the man who had saved David's life only hours earlier. Jason's face hit the dirt as the guards dragged him across the yard, his shackles scraping loud against the concrete. David's entire body locked. His mind spun. Just hours ago, Jason had stepped between him and a blade. Now he was bleeding, helpless, surrounded by guards, shouting orders none of the prisoners dared question. The sun pounded down on everyone, making the yard shimmer like it was burning. No one spoke. No one moved. In Bang Kwang, silence was its own kind of fear. A senior guard pointed toward the medical hut, a small, faded building that always smelled of disinfectant and sweat. Two officers pulled Jason inside. The door slammed shut. A moment later, someone screamed. Then, the screaming stopped. The yard stayed silent for several long seconds before the guards ordered everyone back to their cells. The prisoners moved quickly, heads down. David followed, but his legs felt weak. The scarred man watched him from across the yard again. This time his eyes weren't curious. They were cold, focused, like he had just discovered a new weakness to use. David tried not to look at him, but the man's stare felt like a rope around his chest. Back inside Building 2, the air felt tighter, hotter. Some inmates whispered to each other in low voices. Words like investigation, attack, and motive floated through the cell block. David caught pieces of English from a prisoner with a Chicago accent who said guards found a body in the showers. Someone stabbed, someone important. Someone Jason had been near earlier. But here, in the Bangkok Hilton, evidence didn't need to be perfect. Reports didn't have to be clean. Sometimes all they needed was a name, a witness, a rumor. And Jason had been dragged away before he could speak. David sat on the floor of his cell, hands shaking. He thought of detectives back in the U.S., people trained to look for real evidence, real timelines, real witnesses. Here, the truth was different. Truth bent with pressure. And inside Bang Kwang, pressure was everywhere. Hours passed. The heat rose. Sweat dripped from the ceiling again. David felt trapped inside a slow nightmare. Prisoners slept, talked, smoked, argued. The normal routines kept moving like nothing had happened. But one thing had changed. David no longer felt invisible. Too many eyes were on him. Late that night, a guard banged on the bars. "Miller," he shouted. David jumped. The guard unlocked the door, motioning him forward. "Warden wants interview." Interview. The word hit David's stomach like a stone. Jason was gone. And now they wanted David. The guard marched him down a long hallway lit by flickering bulbs. Every few steps, a metal fan rattled weakly against the heat. At the end of the hall was a small office with a desk, a camera, and a single chair. A Thai officer in a brown uniform sat behind the desk, flipping through a file thick with papers. The officer didn't look angry. He looked bored. "You know this man?" he asked in slow English, sliding a photo across the table. It was Jason. Eyes half closed, face bruised. David felt his pulse jump. "He say you talked to him today." David nodded carefully. "Yes. Only talked. Nothing else." The officer tapped the file. "We have report. Someone attack inmate in shower. One witness say American man with shaved hair was close." He raised his eyes. "Two Americans here, today." David felt the room tilt. The officer wasn't accusing him yet. But the door was open. And once it opened in Bang Kwang, it rarely closed again. "I didn't do anything," David whispered. The officer didn't respond right away. He folded the report, set it aside, and leaned forward. "This prison is full. Many problems. We cannot protect every inmate. You understand?" His tone sounded almost gentle, but the words felt sharp. "If trouble comes, you must stay quiet. Stay small." A guard pulled David up and led him back to his cell. Every step felt heavier than the last. When he reached the doorway, he froze. Someone was sitting on his sleeping mat. The scarred man. He didn't move. He didn't smile this time. He just stared at David like he'd been waiting. The guards locked the door behind them. David's heartbeat pounded in his ears. Then the scarred man finally spoke, voice low and steady. "Jason protected you," he said. "Now he's gone." He leaned closer. "So tell me, American, who protects you now?"